In December, Santa Monica Coalition for a Livable City issued a detailed proposal to the city's committee that is tapped with the responsibility for auditing. And they have had that responsibility since the Citizens Grand Jury of 2012. Smuckluck suggested the city audit committee that the city audit committee examine, quote, the adequacy of internal controls in two areas, employee compensation and size of government. Mm-hmm. So tonight we want to start to have a thoughtful discussion about these issues, not necessarily getting lost in the numbers, but including some of those numbers because they are very concerning. And in order to kind of make the best use of our time, I think we'd like to do is start by asking each of our guests, Robert Gomez and our own city manager, Rick Cole, to take a few minutes just to talk about the issue as they see it, and then we can open the floor to questions. And if you don't mind, our board has some questions we want to be sure that are asked, so I will ask those first and then we'll open it up to everyone, if that's okay. I know Robert Gomez from working on Measure LV. He's a tough nut and part of a very important and old Santa Monica family. And Robert is concerned about the cost and size of staffing. Welcome.
Thank you.
And do
Good
you
evening.
want to tell us why you care about these things?
Yeah, so I can see there's not a lot of Clemson and Alabama fans today. So, as Tricia was saying, you know, my personal background is I've been in the private sector my entire life. You know, I grew up in Santa Monica. My dad bought us home in '53 with the GI Bill, and our family's been here a long time. I went through the Unified School District here, Santa Monica College, UCLA. My personal background is I worked for Anheuser-Busch for 30 years. I was the operations manager for the big plant when you see going back and forth on the freeway there. That's where I spent a lot of years in a lot of different capacities, managerial capacities, resident engineer, distribution manager. And so I've always been involved with crafting compensation and looking at how we go about attracting, retaining, and getting the best people possible. You know, that was my background in the private sector. And I retired from there, and I was able to now divert some of my time and get involved more with the community. And one of the things that I think that most of us in here, it's very concerned to me, you know, with me and my family, is that, you know, we don't want to look at, we think that Santa Monica has, you know, very good people. And I think there's a distinction between, you know, going after the, you know, the people part of it and looking at how we compensate people. And so my concern was not that we don't have good people, because Santa Monica definitely has good people. My dad retired from the city of Santa Monica, so he was a good person. You know? And so I think that my concern and my why is that, you know, how does a city our size that has the highest tax base in the state and also the highest compensation for its employees, how does that happen? And so those are the questions that came about, and my purpose really is to kind of challenge the city and to look at, you know, how did we come about? Do we want to be number one in paying our people? I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to attract the best people, and that's why I wanted to frame what I was saying initially in being in the private sector, because that doesn't necessarily mean you always get the best people. Because a lot of it has to do with culture, and a lot of it has to do with, you know, wanting to work where you know, the environment that you're in. And Santa Monica is a very attractive place to live, and it's a very attractive, I think we would all agree with that. And so it's also very expensive. I know my kids can't afford to live here. You know, I got a teacher and a chef and for the Clippers, and you know, they make good money, but they can't afford to live here. So, you know, I guess I look at this and the why is this, and I kind of came up with some questions, and there was
We'll get to the questions after.
Yeah, there was some unless the first part when Mr. Cole had the presentation with Dominic, there were some discussions that came about on how, you know, how the arrived at the numbers, and there was a lot of discussion about, well, you know, they were tweaked this way, they were tweaked that way. But I think in an overview, you know, we can probably go down and look and see how the statistics were arrived. And there's going to be, you know, one way or another, there's going to be ways that we can arrive at statistics. But the bottom line is that we do have an issue with how we compensate our, you know, the high salaries in Santa Monica. And what I'd like to see is how we as a community address this and how we go about to be part of it.
So you have actually advanced the idea to the city of an independent audit committee.
Well,
right?
that's the recommendation that that Dominic gave, and I think that we talked about, was that I think that the audit that they had was, there were some city council people that were on the audit committee. Is that correct, Mr.
The
Cole?
current committee.
We haven't actually done the kind of audit that we're considering.
Mhm.
And the subcommittee of the city council, which includes 3 council members and 2 independent public members, sure, would commission an audit
Mhm.
done by a private firm.
So let's now transition to our city manager, and you get your few minutes to tell us
Sure.
your view of
Sure.
this issue that is dragging you all over our city into all the neighborhood groups. And
Oh, no, I welcome it. Actually, I would welcome people in June, when we do the budget, to be engaged and involved in helping us figure out how we balance our budget every year. We typically have a neighborhood meeting about traffic on a street or a daycare center, and 100 people come out, and then we adopt a $385 million budget and no one shows up. So I actually welcome the opportunity to come out into the neighborhood and talk about our community's budget issues. And there's literally not a word of what Bob said that I would disagree with. I think there are serious concerns, and I welcome the opportunity for people to have a serious discussion. So let me detail for the questions what I think are the serious issues. One, what ought to be the rules and ground rules for public employees generally, whether you work for the county, whether you work for the school district, whether you work for the state of California, whether you work for one of the independent special districts. That's an issue that you read about in the LA Times. It's an issue that is a real issue. Can we afford, for example, the pension system that covers public employees in our state? Do we pay enough into that? But that goes well beyond our 8.3 square miles. That has to do with how we compensate public employees. That's a legitimate issue, and they're important topics to talk about. The second is, how should we pay Santa Monica employees compared to others? And there's where I do take a concern about misunderstanding. The so-called taxpayer watchdog, Transparent California, whatever their motives, reported inaccurate data. And
well, I have to interrupt you because I know that you and ask you why it was that our own police chief said that her salary was more than you stated.
No,
Her
she said her
compensation.
total compensation.
Total compensation, right.
What Transparent California inaccurately alleged was that her compensation was higher than the police chief of Los Angeles.
Right.
So what they did was they took the police chief's salary in Los Angeles, the money he gets in his pay packet, the money he pays taxes on to Uncle Sam, and they compared it to her salary plus the cost of her benefits, the cost of her pension contributions, and they said, this salary plus all this is her pay, and they didn't include that with the police chief. So she makes less than the police chief of Los Angeles. She makes less than the police chief of San Francisco, but they allege that she makes more than the police chief.
Right. So
of the
if
state.
you don't mind, rather, we've heard this reported that you're critical of that particular data.
I'm not critical, it's wrong.
Okay, but let's talk about the issues broadly.
And that's what I said,
Okay.
was the issue of how we pay people
Because there is
statewide.
this chart. This is Santa Barbara, this is not.
There is the issue of how we pay public employees generally. There is the issue of how we pay them here. Now, while we don't pay higher than San Francisco or higher than Los Angeles, we, among cities our size, the cities around 100,000,
Right.
cities that are relatively affluent compared to other cities in California, we typically pay the first or second in that category. Maybe sometimes we're 5% above number 2, maybe we're sometimes 5% below number 1, but we do pay, as a general rule, at all levels of the organization, we're typically in the high end of that. And that has been true for, I think, 30 years. You can agree with that, you can disagree with
So
that,
let-
but I'm not here to argue about that. That's an issue that we could talk about. Should we
So
be?
that's why we're here.
Yeah.
And that is what we want to talk about.
Sure.
So maybe we'll transition to the.
There are two other
questions.
important issues that I think we should talk about. And one is the size of government,
Right,
right? That's different from what we pay. That is, how many people should work
that's this.
for the
number.
city? Yes.
Mhm.
And that's a serious issue that, again, is not a new issue, is a long-standing issue. And there are pluses and minuses to that. And the final issue is the question of an audit and how to, because we are committed actually to do an audit. We think this is a serious issue and we think it deserves serious independent attention. And so then people might say, well, it needs to be this, or it needs to cover that, or it needs to be more independent or less independent, whatever. But those are the four issues. One is statewide compensation in the public sector, how we pay people in Santa Monica, the size of government in Santa Monica, and how we tackle that through the form of an audit.
Okay, so thank you for laying out the various areas of concern. Questions that were generated by our board have more to do with trying to understand what you think
Sure.
versus what you know about the landscape. And one of them is, do you consider the level of total compensation of Santa Monica staff to be problematic?
Well, that's a problematic. If we look forward, I have been clear for a year and a half that I think that the sustainability of the city is one of the most fiscally conservative managed cities in the state. And we are one of less than 10 cities out of 482 in the state that have a AAA credit rating. We actually have more reserves than the city of Los Angeles, which is 40 times our size.
But what does that have to do with this question?
So the question is, because I want to keep that.
What is that relationship? You're saying that high salaries are
No.
related to AAA
I want to keep us sustainable. So I have said for the last year and a half that we do have to look at how we pay people, because we can afford it now, but will we be able to afford it in 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years? And I think particularly all of us as Californians need to be concerned about the pension problem. And this goes well beyond Santa Monica. This is a statewide problem. Only about between 63 and 75% of the money we need in the bank to meet our long-term pension obligations to public employees. That's a real problem. So is that problematic? I think that is a problem.
Okay, and you've already said that you think that the size of our staff is problematic.
Yes, I do.
Then I'm curious to know why, when you first came to Santa Monica, you created a communications department with 5 new staff, making about $100,000 each. And those people were not removed from that capacity in the various departments under the old system. Why did you think that adding $500,000 of staffing was a good first move on your part?
Well, it wasn't the first move I did, but it was among the first things that I did because I thought that communication was important with our 93,000 citizens. It's part of what anybody in business, public or private, you need to have good communications with your customers. And I didn't think we had good communications. I think we get lots and lots of
And you
questions.
consider us your customers?
In the same sense that
Not the voters or the residents, but the customers?
I consider you both. I consider you all of those things, because you are. You are both consumers of the library services and you're the owners of the library system.
Right.
And the payers.
So those 5 people were hired to create your own communications department, and they were not eliminated, those positions were not eliminated in the various far-flung positions that existed throughout the city under the old system, correct?
And we are going through the budget process to, in fact, take down some of the positions, and I have taken down more than 5 positions since I've been here. We have eliminated more than 5 positions. Week in and week out, we add and subtract because it's a dynamic government. And we find that technology changes. So what we did 10 years ago, we no longer have a need to do. Some people now we employ in our IT department who are no longer needed to do that. They need to do something else, or we need to, if someone retires, we don't necessarily replace them. We might add something in a different spot. So
those are, those are broad terms. I'm actually interested to know. We have just a couple more questions and then we'll open it up to the floor. These are questions from our board. What percentage of our $6.18 million annual budget goes to payroll?
618 million in the budget.
the percentage of the $385 million general fund is about 72%. We have a capital budget, which is almost,
Right.
which has almost no employees, right? It's basically, we're buying cement, we're paying for a construction project. There's no staff involved except the staff to oversee the contract.
Right,
So the relevant number, I think, is to look at the general fund,
right.
which is about 385. And by the way, that 72% is essentially what you find in any city in California. And in fact, I looked at Culver City, for example, and they're at 79.
But our total, I mean, based on that chart, I know you didn't have as much time to review it, we are so far above in terms of our general revenue. So we're taking 72% in terms of salary of a much bigger number. So which
Fair
I appreciate
point.
you saying that that's something that we need to take a look at, just to see if it's not likely to be sustainable over the long run.
It's particularly, the main problem is they're all subject to the same pension system.
Mm-hmm.
And that pension system has been systematically, the state passed a law in 1999, unanimously, by the way. It was 120-0 at the legislature, to improve pensions for state employees. And then cities and counties essentially mimicked what the state had done because they're competing with the state for the same pool of folks. And they made promises based upon how well the stock market was doing in 1999. And over the last 16 years, the stock market has not performed nearly as well. So the result is we committed as a state to pension benefits beyond our ability to pay for after the deepest recession, in our lifetime. So that's the challenge, is I really don't think we can afford this level of staffing 5 years, 10 years down the line. And it's my job not just to think about balancing this year's budget, but on your behalf, to be thinking about where we're going to be in 5 years or 10 years.
So the last question from, and then this is our last question from our board. Did the unions present a challenge to efforts to rein in salaries?
I think unions' job is to maintain or increase salaries. So
specifically in this city.
I don't think it's any different in this city than any other city.
Okay.
It would be true in Los Angeles, it would be true in Culver City, it would be true in Malibu, it would be true.
But in Santa Monica, it is true.
It is true, it is as true as it is in any other community, yes.
Amy?
I just wanted to follow up on what you said before. I think, just as a point of information for people, and you can correct me if I'm wrong with it, my understanding is that it's a compounding problem with the higher salaries and the higher percentage of our budget or total budget that we have in terms of extending our cost effects for the pension. So the more employees we have, if we overpay them, then my understanding is that the contributions to the pension fund is a percentage of salaries. Is that correct?
Correct.
So if we overpay people, then we're overpaying into that, and it kind of compounds our obligation in terms of our costs. And so that's why we end up seeing, if our base pay is too high, then, or above market, then we are paying above market into the pension for that person. So it exacerbates our costs in terms of increasing our general fund. So, and then just on a basic level, the more employees we have, the more people we're paying in for, and the more obligation we have down the road. So there's a ripple effect to what sometimes makes even just a small margin in what might be doing. So I appreciate that you seem committed to looking at this issue of trying to rein it in and make sure we pay market. In terms of a question I have for you, how do we set market pay for the city? How do they do it? Do we do benchmarking? How do they determine the pay of a new employee?
Good question, and basically, there are some jobs that are sort of universal in the public sector. For example, an entry-level police officer, they might have a different job, you know, if they're assigned to a really tough precinct in South Los Angeles compared to someone working in Sierra Madre, but it's the same job.
It's a compensating wage differential for the
Right.
for the risk of the job.
So someone might want to work in Sierra Madre or want to work in LA based upon, you know, the workload or whatnot, but it's the same job to be a starting police officer. There are some jobs for which a particular city, for example, most cities don't have anyone who works at their airport because they don't have an airport, right? So we do two things. We have external salary surveys that we do with cities that are basically our size, very similar to what Santa Barbara did. We do the same thing that they did. We take a look at what Culver City's paying, what Redondo Beach is paying. We probably don't look at Santa Barbara because they're pretty far away from us, but we would look at Beverly Hills, West Hollywood, City of Los Angeles, and we would try to take out outliers, right? You know, somebody that's really way far out, and sort of look, and we're committed usually to be about number 1 or number 2, but not much higher than the number 2.
And you've heard
so
over my shoulder at that. I think it's a policy question about whether that's...
it's absolutely a policy
Yeah.
question.
About whether that should be the way it should be done, yeah.
I'm happy to talk about the pros and cons of that.
Mhm.
But that's, you asked how we do it.
Yeah.
And so we look at what other cities are doing,
Mhm.
and they tend to run in a fairly tight band.
Mhm.
And so that's what we do with jobs that are applicable across the board.
Mhm.
Now we try to apply that to a job that maybe isn't typical. So then we try to compare within the city.
Mhm.
And here's one, Tricia, where unions have a tendency to change the calculus compared to a non-union shop. And again, there are pros and cons to this. If we have any union members, I'm sure they would speak up on behalf of that. But unions have a tendency to want to have everyone treated alike. And management tends, because you've been in that job, to want to pay where we'll do the most good, right?
Do
So,
you have any question related to that? Rob?
So for
Well, I mean, we have the Teamsters union.
Yeah.
And they're, you know, I've
The best.
negotiated.
and we do too, by the way.
So-
We have them in
Yeah.
our public works
No,
department.
but along the unions, do council members, do they allowed to get endorsements or election contributions from city?
That's legal in the state of California.
Okay, and
They are not
Are they-
under Oaks. It would be interesting to see if that might be applied. There are some jobs that I can't get for love or money. I can't fill. And there are some jobs that I think we could cut the pay by 10% and nobody would quit, right? Because, and I would like our compensation system to be more flexible. I'd like, for example, we're having a really hard time getting communications engineers in our tech department because everybody wants tech people, right? It's just a hugely high demand because every company is desperate for tech people. My problem is I can't fill those jobs. Meanwhile, there are some other jobs they'll go nameless, where probably people are really comfortable and if they had to go out and get a job in the private sector or even at a different city, they would have to take a pay cut. So I would like more flexibility to be able to not be sort of locked into a 1.5% cost of living for everyone.
And where would that come from? That, I mean, aren't you the decider?
No, we have union contracts, so we would have to renegotiate those union contracts, and that's, under California law, that's got to be a mutual deal. There's an exception to that in public employment, which is kind of gut-wrenching, frankly. And it's not just politically gut-wrenching, it's also organizationally gut-wrenching. The city council could say, in the absence of an agreement with the union, we will unilaterally impose our version. There are some very difficult hurdles to get there. One is that you have to go to an independent fact finder who would say, well, you actually can afford to do this because look, you have all this tax revenue, so why are you not doing this? And then it only lasts for 1 year, and then it expires. And even though it's politically very difficult, it's also organizationally pretty difficult because you're basically putting a gun to the head of your unionized employees and saying we're going to override the union contract. I've seen it done. It's done very rarely. And when I was in Ventura, which was not as well endowed financially, I warned the city council that if you're going to get everyone to take a 5% pay cut, and I was the first to volunteer, I said, we need to reduce our expenses by 5%. I'm cutting my pay by 5%. And I hoped that that would set an example for our unions. But in order to get that, I had to tell the council, you have to look out at the people who pick up your trash, respond when you call 911, and you have to look them in the eye and you have to say, I'm willing to vote a 5% cut. And if you're not prepared to do that, don't send me down that path, right? Don't have me threaten that and then fold at the last minute. The result was the council said, no, we will stick all the way through, and we achieved agreements because the unions knew that we were serious and they knew it would apply to everybody. They didn't want me to tell them to take a pay cut and then me not take a pay cut. So we were able to do that.
So is Santa Monica a city in which the unions, because of their relationship with the council in terms of endorsements and supporting certain council members, the presumption is and the perception is in the community that these high salaries are the product of those political relationships? Whereas Ventura is not a city with that kind of intense relationship. Ventura is a city that had 82% voter turnout this last election.
Because
And they restored the SOAR initiative to slow development and protect the farmland.
they actually extended it, they didn't restore it.
Extended it.
Yes.
Yes, I know you're familiar with it, but my question is, the things you're talking about in terms of relationships with the union, isn't there a tremendous amount of power that they have in this process we're discussing now?
Well, look, all politics is local. I think, in fact, the bigger reality is not who's endorsed. I think the reality is that this is actually, we're in California, which is a blue state. We're in a very blue part of the state. And I think not only is the council sort of reflexively pro-working people, which often translates to pro-union, but I think so is a good part of the constituency. And the reality is that only about 10% of the private sector is unionized, and about 80% of the public sector is unionized. So if you're pro-union, that you have an imbalance there, and I think that's a challenge.
And I guess that's
and I don't think it's just in Santa Monica.
where the fiduciary responsibility lacks, and
Kathy.
that's where I see one of the fundamental flaws in this, is where does the fiduciary responsibility come back to the taxpayer, to the people that are actually putting the bill?
Taffy, you have a question?
We both have the same question.
Yeah, you mentioned
And then
that,
Roger.
I think you verified that 72% of our revenue and our general fund goes to paying employee salaries.
Total compensation,
Total.
salary, pension
Correct.
contribution, benefits, and workers' comp.
And thank you for that clarification. What percentage goes to total compensation for union employees? What portion?
I can't hear you.
Okay,
So what portion of the 72% of our general fund budget goes to total compensation for employees? I was curious if you know, or if you could get back to us, what percentage of that is for union employees?
And what percentage of employees are union?
Yeah, that's.
They tend to be lower,
Because there's-
lower paid.
Yeah.
Well, let him answer.
Yeah, 'cause,
I
if
don't
you're
know,
salaried,
I don't
you're not
know,
unionized.
I don't know the percentage, but what I can tell you is
Mhm.
the only non-unionized folks in our city are people who work in the personnel department on issues where it would be a conflict of interest for them to be a union member. People who work in my office, because it would be viewed as a conflict of interest to work in the union,
Planning department?
and the department heads. Everyone else, including the deputy police chief, the fire chief, all the librarians.
Associate planners, things like that?
They
Yeah,
are all
Roger,
union.
Roger has a question.
Yeah, I'd like to give a specific answer or a specific example. And it goes back to an email that you wrote to the city council where you talked about the after sorting out accuracy issues.
Mhm.
You talked about the fact that the police chief in Santa Monica was paid $311,000. The police chief in San Francisco was paid $316,000 base, a $5,000 difference. That's your number, right?
That's right.
So our police chief gets paid 98.4%, the same salary as the head of San Francisco. I cannot believe that you, in good faith, would want to make an argument to this group of people that the complexity of the job that our police chief faces on a day-to-day basis is in any way equivalent to the complexity and the problems that the police chief in the city of San Francisco faces on a daily basis. And just so that you're clear as to why I think this person is grossly overcompensated, I'd like to give you a few statistics, and you can challenge them, and I'll tell you where they came from. It's called citydata.com. But to begin with, the city of Santa Monica has 8.4 square miles of territory for the police department. Is that correct? You just said 8.3 earlier tonight.
Plus or minus, I mean, it's between 8.3 and 8.4.
Okay.
Round up or round down.
City of Santa Monica, the city of San Francisco, 46.9. San Francisco is 5.5 times bigger geographically. Based on the 2010 census, the city of Santa Monica had 93,000 people. It's probably about 95,000 now. The city of San Francisco had 865,000 people, probably about 890 now. In 2014, last year, the crime statistics were available in this report. Murders in Santa Monica, 0. San Francisco, 45. Rapes in Santa Monica, 30. San Francisco, 355. Robberies in San Francisco, 120. San Francisco, 3,224. Assaults, 188 versus 3,137. Burglaries, 535 versus 5,237, 10 times more. Thefts, 2314 versus 33,730. Auto thefts, 177 versus over 6,000.
As lawyers say, we'll stipulate.
And arsons, 19 versus 241. My argument to you is our police chief, based upon the scope of the job, is grossly overcompensated. And it's your job and the city council's job to stop stealing money from the taxpayers of Santa Monica and bring this under control. This is an outrage, and you and the city council should be embarrassed that that I can quote these statistics. It just seems to me it's an outrage that this person is getting that much money, and she's not the only example. So where am I wrong?
I think you're comparing someone who's brand new with someone who's been on the job for 5 years. Second, it's like President of the United States or Governor of California, which is often used as a benchmark. You could pay the president $100,000 and you would have no shortage of applicants, right? Governor of California, people do not run for Governor of California for the salary, because as soon as they step out of that office, just look at George Deukmejian, look at Gray Davis, look at, well, Arnold Schwarzenegger's a special case. They are going to make megabucks in the private sector based upon having served as the governor of the largest state in California. So when it comes to big city police chiefs, those salaries don't have to be high, because to be police chief of San Francisco, you will have qualified applicants lined up around the door because of the prestige. It's similar to the comments you were making, which can cut both ways, right? A similar argument could be made, and I'm prepared to acknowledge that, a similar argument that maybe we shouldn't have to pay in Santa Monica, because we would have, because it's a high prestige and it's a job that has a lot of positives. So that argument cuts both ways, but that's why the police chief of San Francisco is getting 316 and not 816. Because I guarantee you that the head of the hospital over here at UCLA is getting 850,000, and is a public employee. And that the basketball coach, at UCLA is making 2.2 million, and he's a public
Yeah, but
employee.
we don't have to pay his salary.
And I think we're
Right.
talking
Well, you
about
do have to pay UCLA, and you have to pay the UCLA.
I think we have to go look at this. I think-
But-
Jerry.
So I don't want to get sidetracked on that. I'm saying that that the San Francisco, the reason they're able to attract for a job as hard as San Francisco is, and I'd be the first to say it's a much harder job than Santa Monica, is because of the prestige involved, and they will get top quality candidates almost no matter what. The third piece to keep in mind is we actually spend a tremendous amount of time to achieve those numbers, right? To achieve so if you were to reverse it and say pay for performance, you would say that we're actually doing a pretty good job of keeping this community safe. Now, we have different demographics, but we have some real challenges. And we have part of the reason this number is so big is we have a bigger police department than most cities our size, because we are really working hard to keep safe. 4 burglaries in a neighborhood we'd like to have it be 0, right? We don't say, oh, it's 4 burglaries and it's San Francisco, so who cares?
So we have another
We
question. Jerry?
try to drive that number down. And I think we have one
Oh,
of
I'm
the
sorry, I
best
didn't
police
see that.
chiefs in the state of California. Now,
So-
should she be paid $311,000? I think that's a legitimate question.
Okay, so first Jerry, and then, I don't know your name.
Michael.
Michael. Jerry?
Okay. I'd like to put out a little context here. When I read a few years ago, about the cities of Southgate, Bell, and these other places where salaries were ridiculous. And then I read about the county fair salaries last year, where people were getting grossly overpaid. My conclusion, and I think other people shared the conclusion, is they gave those salaries to those people because they could do it. There was no accountability. What I saw from reading these numbers in Santa Monica is that whoever sets these salaries did it, and they can do it. And it touches upon what you said. When you have a meeting to discuss budgets and nobody shows up, there's a vacuum. So there's no accountability to rein in these salaries. And it keeps accelerating year in, year out. So when we express interest here, I don't want to focus just on the police chief. We have 168 people that are probably overpaid. And maybe they are good people, and I don't know their names. So I'm not interested in the particular person. I think we can do as good a job running Santa Monica and paying less. And what it sounds like to me you're saying, and people are suggesting, is the unions control all this. And,
I'm not suggesting.
I'm a former union person, so my question is, how do we rein them in? Who determines that there should be a
Well,
cutback?
I think,
My hope,
I think that
Go ahead.
what I will share, if you don't mind, is that the fact that people are rallying around this issue that you and Dominic have brought forward, and at this time means something, and that the city hasn't necessarily felt that pressure from the community with this kind of rigor. I mean,
That's
this
the
room
lack
is
of
pretty full,
accountability.
right?
You don't have to answer
You said
anything.
something interesting about having, whether written or unwritten, a policy of picking one of the top, making sure that the pay is in the top one or two. Maybe that's something that needs to be reevaluated as a policy decision, if that's really the underlying thing that's driving this. You know, it's not surprising that we keep seeing everybody at the one or two, because that is deliberate. And maybe that's the policy decision that really needs to be debated and discussed, and whether we need to do that, because the market usually I mean, like you said, if we're getting a lot of applicants for a position, we shouldn't be paying more than market to bring them in. And there's such a thing as what I think you were alluding to, what's called a compensating wage differential. If somebody's in a high-risk area or in a podunk town, you may have to pay more to get them to go work there. But I think we'd be hard-pressed to say that this is an undesirable place to work or live. And it can be a resume.
In an ideal world,
Yeah.
we would have a more dynamic pay structure, which I think is the way the world is going. Now, there are pluses and minuses, and sometimes we sometimes see pluses and we forget about the minuses. Those are what are called unintended consequences. But if you say, okay, we're not going to be one or two, we're always going to be right square in the middle, well, then you're right square in the middle, and you're going to have a hard time always competing for some of the best people. There are pluses and minuses to all these things. And that's the thing about a democracy. And I appreciate, Tricia, you bringing me up short about describing people as customers. I was really talking about the commonality between the
Well,
private.
I mean,
I'm acknowledging. I was talking about the commonality between the private sector and the public sector. But we are different. We absolutely are different. And the thing about the difference is, you're the stockholders, you're the board of directors.
Would you support the independent audit that Robert described?
I not only support it, I've recommended it.
What do you think the barriers are to achieving that?
I don't think there are any barriers. I think that people legitimately should pay attention to what we look at, right? You should not just trust us blindly. You should make your own recommendations of what you would like to see in the audit. You should come to the meeting or send representatives to the meeting and make sure that it's all in the up and up, and that the people who do it are going to do a good job and a fair job, and that you can trust it.
Do you think a community should be part of that audit?
What is that? Tell me what that means.
Somebody from the community
Should be
involved in the audit.
So sit with the professional auditor and look over their shoulder?
Well, I think if you look at us as residents, you're going to find there's a lot of people that would participate in that process.
So give me a suggestion about how that would work, and I'm open
Well,
to that idea.
I would say
But
that-
we were going to hire a company, a professional firm, to do the audit, and so are we going to have volunteers?
Could a citizen be on that committee that picks the firm?
We have
Robert,
2 citizens on it
how were
already.
they picked?
They were selected by, everyone was open to put in applications, and we were looking for people
Did you hear about it?
with
CPA
with-
backgrounds.
with accounting backgrounds, because it's an audit committee.
He seems pretty connected to this subject and doesn't seem to have any idea you put that message out. Is that
Not
a
everybody
problem?
hears about everything when you have a city of 93,000.
So do I
We got lots of
understand, you're
applicants.
talking about using the existing audit committee?
That's where we start.